Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am back for the next commentary, and we are going into more of the classic monsters from Universal in the golden age of horror from the early 30s. We're going to do one that I haven't seen a fan audio commentary on, so I'm sort of excited about doing it. We're doing The Mummy today, the classic Boris Karloff horror film. And it'll be fun. There's a lot to discuss here. It's a movie that I've sort of had a reevaluation of my opinion of it after some recent rewatchings of the film. There's it has its flaws, and to some they might seem pretty crippling, but I think there's a lot to discover in The Mummy, and I think it's a film that definitely benefits from taking a closer look at it and some of the things that make it unique. I'm paused on the Universal logo. The plane's just about to fly around, and let's not waste any time and begin this classic horror film. Let's go. 3, 2, and 1. So, like I was saying, I sort of have had a complex relationship with this picture. I went through some periods where I just really couldn't stand it, to be frank. I would, find it, like, boring, and, it's a slow moving film. Here we have Swan Lake again, which I just love. It's a third film we've seen it in. You could almost say it's Karl Freund's trilogy. He was involved with the 3 pictures that we've seen so far that have had Swan Lake in it. This one doesn't feature Bela Lugosi, however. This film, like I was saying, I don't want to get too sidetracked, but I just love Swan Lake. This film I've sort of had a complex relationship with. I had some, I don't know, I just found it to be really slow moving and boring. And you might say, Mike, that's kind of hypocritical of you because you really love Dracula, which a lot of people believe has those problems as well. And I just think this is Dracula, or I don't know if I don't think this anymore. I think this is Dracula without the best pieces of Dracula. Bela Lugosi, obviously, and I don't know. It's that was how I felt, but looking at it recently, I'm sort of getting a renewed appreciation for this film, and Karloff's performance in particular. Here we have the opening of the film, and these Dracula comparisons are going to plague this commentary, I might imagine, but this, the comparison is that this opening and opening to Dracula are the most sensational scenes in either film. We have Bramwell Fletcher here, who really turns in a very memorable performance as the little aide here. And we have Professor Wemple and Dr. Mueller there.
This is your first trip. I've been out here 3 years, and I'm more curious about that mummy than you are, and even more about that box.
Of course, what we need to discuss here is Karloff in that mummy makeup. It's just incredible craftsmanship on Jack Pierce's part. And, just you really have to appreciate Karloff because the lengths he went through. This is the most extreme thing he ever had to do in his entire career. That makeup. It took 8 hours to put that on him, and it was just painstakingly drying cotton and chipping it at his face. Jack Pierce. Jack Pierce, actually, you know, he did look at sort of the given circumstances around the character, like we talk about Frankenstein and how that famous flat top look is from Jack Pierce imagining that there was a amateur surgeon creating the monster. But for the mummy, he went straight to the source and designed the look of it after photographs he had had of mummies that had been unearthed around this time. This film is very much contemporary to the public interest at the time. In fact, it directly was influenced by the King Tut discovery and, sort of the curses that supposedly befell Carter and the men who went into his tomb. A lot of strange and odd things happened to those men. The film is written by John Balderston, who, if that name sounds familiar, it should. He had a hand in a lot of these films. Most notably, he collaborated on adapting the Dracula play to the American audiences, the one that Lugosi would portray on Broadway. And he had a crack at a few of the drafts of the Frankenstein scripts as well. But he was brought in to this film when it was a project called Caligostro, I believe. That popular folk tale about this, I don't know what you call him, sorcerer who achieves immortality, and it had the same sort of framework as the eventual Mummy film, as you're concerned with immortality and reincarnation, and what Balderson, I think, cleverly did was completely redesign this film to match the Egypt craze, and, just the superstitions that the King Tut story had. He actually was a correspondent, I believe, for the New York Times when they were bringing in the artifacts from King Tut's tomb, and so he was sort of fascinated with it and designed this horror picture as as the Caligostro assignment. Here we have Edward Van Sloane, who's essentially playing Van Helsing again, and for what Balderson was clever doing with this picture, unfortunately, he's borrowing the same exact framework as Dracula, which we'll see later. Freund, what you'll notice in this scene here coming up, in which this poor sap resurrects Karloff, is that Freund, I guess, he explained that he was very much into letting the audience use their imagination to develop the horror in their heads. And, despite the fact that there's some pictures of Karloff walking around in that incredible getup, he isn't actually shown walking in the film. There's some brief shots of him moving his arms down as he's resurrected by this character, but there's not a shot of him like doing that mummy walk, which we've sort of become so accustomed to. The legend of the Hollywood legend, sort of becomes fact. This film is not about that mummy at all. Those were later films from the 40s with Lon Chaney Jr. and Tom Tyler as the mummy. This picture, Freud wanted to leave it to the imagination. So that makeup, you might say, poor Karloff sort of suffered for nothing. But I think Freud actually was pretty intelligent in doing that. You might figure that mummy there is just a dummy, but that he's Karloff. It makes this scene all the more suspenseful. And really, you expect Karloff to resurrect there, and just going against expectations are pretty. They eat at you a little bit, even after all these years, and once these Universal films have become so iconic, and that you watch them and rewatch them. I think this opening sequence is still very highly effective. And one of the reasons it is because of this character here, Bramwell Fletcher, who, this might be one of the finest moments of acting in one of these Universal films. This scene here that we're about to see, I might, just quiet down because it's pretty incredible even just to listen to it. But Fletcher this scene easily could have been a complete failure if Fletcher had gone over the top. But what's so amazing about this is how sincere it is and how incredible he really becomes here. See, here is one of the most incredible sequences of the film, Karloff. Moving those hands down, you want to see him walk, but just that is pretty impressive. And he takes the scroll here. That makeup is so incredible, even on the hands. You see the little patches of dust and cotton kind of fall down there. Jack Pierce actually, the Hollywood Makeup Association, or one of the trades groups, gave him an award for it, and it's sort of, fun to think about that. Yeah, that's all you see there is his bandages sort of trudge and follow down, and sort of the debris of everything follow him. And that laughter there is like so gut-wrenching. Man, that's such a challenge. After some of these films, they might get accused of having like moments like this where they're a little campy, or maybe not campy, but just like they lose their effect after a little while. Maybe some might say that about Dwight Fry. And I honestly, before I knew any better, I thought that was Dwight Fry playing that part there. But Fletcher is incredible in that sequence. He's really one of the best moments in all of these films there, because it does play with that idea of using your imagination here. Here we have David Manners, who is the hero of this film, as he was the hero in Dracula. He also appeared in Dracula, as did Edward Van Sloane, and very popular actor, and he's in so many of these films. He's really just there because he's handsome, and I don't know, he's meant to look heroic.
He found too much. Was it 10 years ago? Queer story that young Oxford chap had with him going mad.
Queer story that young Oxford chappie had with him going mad.
Or beyond human endurance, walking around in his band when he's wrong. He was laughing when your father found it. He died laughing, in a straitjacket. Your father never explained. But when the best excavator England has turned out, a man who loved it, said he'd never come back here, that meant something.
That meant something. Here we have an introduction of Karloff's Imhotep. And actually, this makeup is a little more subtle, obviously, but it's really sort of effective. And I think it's, not just what Pierce does with the dried up face and with the cotton, but I think it's also this costume and how Karloff uses his posture. He's really, really incredible. And, Karloff wasn't a tall man by any sense. He actually one of the famous anecdotes is that he was actually significantly shorter than Colin Clive, and that's why those big boots were created. But the fact is, he carries himself very, very well. He's brilliant in this film, and I love his posture and that little cane he has there.
I didn't catch your name.
Oh, that's they.
This is actually kind of an important moment in Karloff's horror filmography. He had done some character roles in the talkie pictures, he had done some character roles, but this is the first horror film where he actually has to carry it with dialogue the entire time. And, you might wonder, before this, he had done the old Dark House and Frankenstein, which he had played mute characters. And I think with this film, they sort of had to reevaluate his appeal a little bit. You look at the promotional materials for the old Dark House. They have like a disclaimer that says that this man who's playing the character of the butler is legitimately Boris Karloff, and it's a matter, it's not just a makeup, it's even though it speaks well to his talent, it's something like that. It's a great little promotion, and I think that's what people thought of with Boris Karloff, is that he was just, or at least initially, that maybe Universal thought the appeal of Karloff was that he, was just, could wear those makeups, sort of like Lon Chaney, but, like, people underestimated Lon Chaney's talents as well. And Karloff, I think, really showcased that he was more than the character of the monster, and this character, he has some sympathetic edges, Imhotep, but I think he's a little more macabre. He's more, like I was saying about the comparisons to Dracula. He's more of a Dracula character than a Karloff character. Obviously you feel sorry for him a little bit. All he had to endure and go through, but you'll see the backstory. But he's still, I think, pretty evil and malevolent a little bit, and it's interesting to see Karloff play a character like that. One of the reasons I think maybe that Karloff, aside from like the mystery aspect of Karloff, even though people probably had seen him in other films, but is this about his voice was that distinct lisp, which sort of. It's his trademark. It's why he talks like he was, and he was very self-conscious about it. But I think he really does a great job with his delivery of the dialogue in this picture. Uh, it's very slow and very to the point, and it's kind of creepy, almost like you might say that opening scene with where he meets the David Manners character, Wemple. Uh, it speaks of another similarity to Dracula, that this character isn't mortal. He's, evil and immortal on a different plane of existence, and instead of like Dracula, who has to really be suave and he wants to fit in to the point where, he becomes a member of distinguished society. This mummy wants none of that, and Karloff portrays that really, really well. Here we are being introduced to the female lead of our story, Helen Grosvenor, who's played by Zita Johann, and I know I've mentioned this before in some other commentaries. I like looking at these female characters because sometimes, I don't know, like, I know it's not always fair to do, but horror films and even films of the older times, the classic films, they always have had criticisms of how they portray women, and so I like taking a look at the female characters and the actresses who play them. And I think you'll find, and one of the things I really have loved about The Mummy is how strong Zita Johann is in this film. Your pardon, I dislike to be touched. See, that's a wonderful example of what I was explaining about how this is different from Dracula, and how Karloff delivers that line. It like showcases all of his lisp, but it's really kind of creepy. If Lugosi had done it, Lugosi had done it, I don't know, it would be different. Karloff, actually, he was a somewhat appropriate choice to play this role. I read a lot about Lugosi and Chaney, obviously, you've known that from the other commentaries, but now I'm starting to read up a little bit about Karloff, and, he's a lot more interesting a character and an actor than I sort of gave him credit for. He was compared to Lugosi and Chaney and Chaney Jr., he just seems a lot more conventional. He doesn't have that tragic edge as a person, and so I was a little less interested in him just as a person. I mean, I never thought he gave a bad performance or anything. I just preferred Lugosi. I think he gives great performances. But, just reading about him now, it's really been a lot of fun, and I've really learned a lot. I've just read a great biography about Karloff More Than a Monster by Stephen Jacobs, and it's really meticulously researched. Gives you really everything you would want to know about all of the projects. They go really in depth. There's a great chapter on the Mummy in it. But, long story short, I think he was a good choice for this role because, Karloff was actually Indian, or he had some Indian blood in him on his mother's side. His father was a British diplomat in India, and he was always very self-conscious about that. And, I know Egypt and India aren't the same, but, just sort of that exotic edge you might not think of with Karloff. I think he really brings brings that to the film. Here we are sort of being introduced to the aspect of the film that, brought what the film was sort of designed around, was this idea of hypnosis and reincarnation. Helen is the reincarnation of Ananxanamen, the princess, and it's a major theme in the picture, and they do this sequence very well. It's very creepy, and it speaks to that slow, sort of methodical buildup of everything. What I was saying about Freud in the commentaries of the films he's been involved in, there is a slowness, maybe with the pacing and how the film moves along. There's not big events, but these just some very, very frightening images and sequences in the film that you really have to appreciate for not just for what the time, but just what the image captures. That sequence of Imhotep chanting Ankhsenamet into the camera and getting a really good look at that Pierce makeup must have been petrifying to the audiences of the time. And it just looks incredible. Obviously, one of the things about these films is the stills, and that's certainly a part of it. I talked about Lon Chaney, and some of that's pretty much all that exists in some cases. And what Pierce was able to do is there's some still moments where if you freeze the frame, it looks like a composition, a piece of artwork, and that's really, really incredible. And the framing of the faces of these menaces is really something. It really, showcases a type of not only the craftsmanship on Pierce's makeup and the lighting of the camera, but I think it showcases how talented not only Karloff and not only Karloff but Lugosi as well. They really have to embody that character for these build-up scenes. They cannot exit the role at all. They really have to be committed, and to their credit, they are. They really get into that role.
Here you are, my dear. I suppose you introduced yourself?
Here's another big comparison to Dracula. It starts off in the exotic locale of Transylvania, or in this case, Egypt. Or, this whole film takes place in Egypt, but, it starts off in the tombs, and they've just excavated the mummy, and, the film moves action to these little sitting rooms. And I think it speaks to what Balderston brought to it, because he was initially a playwright, and obviously you have to condense everything a little bit. That's what his Dracula was. It all takes place within one room for the most part, and it's not for people looking for people looking for a lot of action and a lot of breakneck thrills. aren't going to get them from a film like The Mummy or Dracula. But I think it brings out brings out acting. You know, an actor has to really give a strong performance to get attention here. And you know, I don't know. You might argue that Herbert Bunsen doesn't, and maybe David Manners doesn't. But I think in this film, Zita Johann is incredible, and Karloff is obviously incredible. And I think, you know, even Edward Van Sloane, who we talked about from Dracula, you know, he was sort of an underwhelming Van Helsing at times. Yeah, I think he really improves in this film. He really, I think, ups the stakes a little bit, has a little more urgency in the way he delivers his dialogue.
Something about her head. I had never mentioned the name, yet I heard Miss William mutter in ancient Egyptian. Something about Imhotep. Imhotep. What was this artist doing in the museum?
You know, here's something that sort of hurts this film a little bit, is that you know, I don't know. I think this one character's a little too all-knowing. This Mueller a little bit. He's just, you know, too driven, and he immediately suspects Ardeth Bay of being the murderer. Or, you know, he immediately suspects Ardeth Bay of having a connection with Helen, and that's all there is to say, really. You know, whatever. It gets the action rolling a little bit. I guess I could say, you know, not worrying that his character isn't a normal human being, so I pretend for longer than you have to. The Scroll of Thoth. Thoth.
Let me put this here. It'll be more comfortable.
You know what? I really like 3 films David Manners is in. Dracula, you know, I obviously loved. It was the first movie we did, and I told you it was probably my favorite movie. And then, you know, we did, we haven't done The Black Cat yet, but we will. It's just something I'm sort of building up to, because it's one that's sort of really, I've really developed a lot of love for, and I want to do it right. But this film, you know, these moments with David Manners flirting with the women, they're just kind of, I don't know, goofy. You know, he's sincere enough, but he's really, I think he's just sort of playing to the expectations of, you know, what audiences, you know, that they want a little, I don't know if I'd call it melodrama, but theatricality to it. And that's, I think, sort of how I pinpoint David Manners. You know, they wanted a theatrical, handsome-looking hero, and that's certainly what he was. And you know, like, he was always a great interview to read, and you know, certainly left his mark on these classic films. But you know, he's sort of comical a little bit.
Somebody stole it.
What became the mummy of Imhotep? Yeah, that's another thing. Well, the mummy was stolen. They literally left. There must have been like a second gap. We were introduced to Noble Johnson, who we talked a little bit about in the last picture. He is the Nubian, and The poor guy is forced to become Karloff's slave because he's bound by the bloodline, or I don't know how they explain it. It's kind of it's not really all that well developed. He's sort of there because he looks menacing, and he's black, so that's kind of the role that an actor like that could get. But I did mention in the last commentary that he was a friend of Lon Chaney Jr., or not Lon Chaney Jr., Lon Chaney Sr., the Lon Chaney. They grew up together in Colorado Springs, and they were close childhood friends, and he worked undeveloped. They worked, I think, in theater together. And I guess Karloff developed a friendship with him as well, from what I've heard. And, he looks imposing enough, and it's sort of fun seeing him in these films. I mean, I think, you look at actors from this time who are African American, and it's unfortunate to see the kind of characters that they will, but I'd have to think that that there's great deal of love of acting with those characters. I mean, with those actors, because they would have to love acting, I think, to engage in some of the stereotypes that they're forced to play. And so I have a great deal of respect for them. Even the ones in films like this, and King Kong with those sort of parts, which Noble Johnson was also in, and that one's even worse than anything in this film.
He's come from Sloane.
They immediately know that he's the mummy. I actually think that maybe, I don't know, some of these sets might be left over from Dracula. One of the sitting rooms, this reminds me somewhat of Dracula. Wouldn't surprise me at all. There's some set dressings that are obviously very different.
I find no solitary student with his books. I fear my visit is inopportune. On the contrary.
On the contrary. Great line. He gives it just before he reveals the monster. It's unfortunate that there's not really a intense moment where Mueller can confront this Imhotep like he did, like Evan Sloane did in Dracula.
Just wondering how you knew where the tomb of the Princess Anxenama was hidden. Partly inference, partly chance. Sir Joseph, you seem disturbed. Yes. A tragedy at the museum after you left.
Tragedy? When I was there?
When you were there, Miss Grosvenor?
Yes, they told me I went there and tried to get in after...
See, Zita Johann, I think, sort of what I was discussing about these female characters in these films, they all sort of become, I don't know what you would say, I don't want to say property or whatnot, but they sort of become a ball that these characters have to fight over. But Zita Johann has a lot of strength in this, even with this sort of storyline. But I think she really is very strong, and there's something exotic about her, and it's not just that she's foreign. I think she really not only plays up the sex appeal, but the mystery of the character very well. This character, obviously you never quite know sort of what's going on with her, because she's under the hypnotic influence of the mummy. And so she's really playing a multitude of characters, really, because obviously this is a reincarnation story.
Part of which was transcribed when it was first found.
Oh yeah, he actually does get a moment. It's not as strong because Lugosi's not there, where they confront in Hotep, and he, but it's not as strong.
Records of the 18th dynasty. These are pre-dynastic ideographs. The scroll from which this was copied was stolen 10 years
Oh
ago.
gosh, what was I gonna say?
Most interesting.
She's actually playing a number of shades of the character, and she does so pretty well. And she is my favorite Universal heroine. I think in the end of the film you'll see even more so why, because I think, that they aren't able to save her in quite the same way as Dracula. She was sort of a prima donna in some ways. I think MGM, from what I've read, tried to develop her as a star, and she was really into the craft of acting, but she was really into the craft of acting, and so when she signed this deal with MGM, she stipulated that the ancient blood. That's the only reference to why Noble Johnson's character has to be a slave. Here's one of the few sequences that, when I was speaking about those great still images looking directly into Karloff's eyes, and they look like, it's a black and white movie, but you see how yellow, like, they're a moment in a black and white movie where you know what color they are. Going back to what I was saying, she, Zita Johann, a part of her deal with MGM was that she could approve what projects they gave her, and so she actually refused pretty much everyone because she thought they were all terrible. And, she developed a reputation of being extremely difficult to work with. And a project at Universal sort of fell through that she was signed for. And then, she agreed to do this picture because she believed very much in reincarnation. And so she thought that that would be an interesting topic to do. And I guess Universal thought she would be a great horror heroine, and they actually planned for her to be in a few more films, but and she was actually going to be more prominently billed, but that sort of attitude and strong, I don't know, that sharp tongue got her in trouble, and she said, like, a comment about against Carl Laemmle Jr., from what I've read, that sort of wrecked her career, that kind of thing going on over and over again, which is a shame because she was very, very talented. She did not get along with Karl Freund, the director of this film, at all. Freund was a first-time director, and he actually was put on this project relatively, really close to production. It was sort of a last-minute decision to cast, or to put him in the director's chair, and he had never directed before, and so, what sometimes he'll do is, if in the case of that he would get blamed for delays or problems, he would get a scapegoat. So he chose Zita Johann to be that scapegoat. And he actually went to her and said, I want to do a scene with full frontal nudity, believe it or not. And you know, Zita Johann, you know, being such a strong person herself, sort of knew he was testing her, and he tried to stand up to her, and actually he was just miserable to her. From what I read, it just like reads like incessant harassment. Um, you know, he like there was I guess a chair. Everyone had the chair with the names on. She didn't have one, and he would hold her. He would like. He was really concerned about you know, making the film under budget and on like even above time, and so they'd have like insane schedules that like drove her to the point where she actually fainted in a famous sequence in the film with Karloff there. And you know, Karloff was a gentle soul. Obviously, no one. I've never read any bad story about him, and he actually I've read stood up to the director to get her to treat Zita Johann a little better, and he was the one that, you know, sort of halted the production to make her, you know, to make sure she was okay. But it's unfortunate, and it just sort of goes to some of maybe the sexism at the time as well. I've actually heard an urban legend, and it was sort of, it's in the Karloff book on the chapter in The Mummy, that Freud even went to the point where he found out her menstrual cycle and like scheduled her scenes around it to harass her. I've heard Freud actually wasn't that nice a guy. You know, very talented, obviously, but you know, there's a reason that his directing career wasn't very long. You know, obviously very talented. He actually did come back later on and developed the camera method for which to, three camera method for which to shoot sitcoms with I Love Lucy. I guess Ricky Ricardo sort of dug him up and got him to agree to do that. This is another sequence, and he does this a few times with his eyes opening. They're really, really incredible. That's that's either a well-trained dog or a really poorly trained dog for this scene. You know, maybe he's afraid of going into Imhotep's lair, or maybe he's just really, really bad on a leash. It's kind of interesting. Oh, the poor puppy. Yeah, this is the sequence where I think Johann fainted from exhaustion. Her career did not last very long after this. She, I guess what I read is that she became an acting professor and teacher, and I imagine she was a very good one. Looking at her IMDb credits, it looks as though she appeared in a movie in the 80s, and she must, you know, must have been very old at the time, but it looks like a horror fan found her and cast her in a film. I haven't found it, but I've been meaning to look for it. I don't have the title on the top of my head, but I don't think it'll be a very good film, but I'd love to see what she would have done after revisiting horror after all that time. This is one of the most iconic sequences in the film. You'll not remember what I show you now, and yet I shall awaken memories of love and crimes and death. And then you see the pool start to bubble. This sequence is really a highlight of the film, and it really, you know, if we're talking about stuff that sort of pushed the boundaries of what horror could be, this sequence is, pretty incredible, and extremely, like it must have been the most shocking moment in the film for audiences. It's You'll notice that it's filmed somewhat like a silent film. They really wanted to have a dreamlike quality to it, and I wish it was. I don't know how you could do it, honestly, but I wish it was sort of projected like that. Karloff, Frankenstein was his 44th film, and he hadn't really done a lot of sound films before then, so he actually had a great deal of experience with that, and he's pretty good in this sequence. I love um, his expressions here. He really does a wonderful job. His eyes are incredible. That's one of the great things about Karloff that you sort of forget, because his voice was iconic too, but his eyes in this film, they really show how poetic they were. The sequence was going to be a great deal longer. They actually filmed, aside from this origin story of Imhotep, they actually filmed a lot more, sort of explaining the various lives that Ananxanamon's reincarnation lived in over the centuries. There's a sequence. I think, through the Crusades. I don't know. I know the Crusades is a big one because there's an actor credited as a Saxon warrior from that sequence, and it's not actually in this film. It was cut out, and it was cut out because they wanted to lessen Zita Johann's screen time, which is really unfortunate. Yeah, you see Karloff, well, like he's really making bold expressions on his face there. There's some great moments in this sequence. I wish it could be projected a little faster. It would really, nail that home. Of course, this sequence was actually used a number of times in the later Mummy films. I think the whole thing is actually used in The Mummy's Hand because they didn't want to reshoot all this. Some of the close-ups have Tom Tyler, but it's basically Karloff doing this part over, like doing this over and over again. But it's a really memorable. And here's some horrifically grim stuff. And they actually show the wrappings going around his face. They actually, of course, Universal remade The Mummy, and it's a mixed bag. I suppose its heart is in the right place. Like, it's the remake talk started with Joe Dante, and then actually Clive Barker had a chance at it, and then the least interesting person was the one who gets it made, Stephen Sommers, who makes like an Indiana Jones ripoff. But their sequence that showcases this with Imhotep being buried alive is really effective moment of that film. Yeah, carving off all the ornate jewelry and prayers. It really drives home the idea, actually it is sort of effective. You'd think that, this is sort of paganism, that might have been a problem with the film, that that they're talking about a pagan religion, but actually, you get the feeling that there's a good and an evil in this universe, that ISIS and Anubis, I would reckon. It really, it still works. Like, and sort of, I don't know, simplistic good and evil, sort of. Oh yeah, here they actually showed an impaled body there with blood. That they got that in there is like really. It might be the most extreme moment in these horror films. I know I say that a lot, but these horror films got quite a lot in them. And, I don't want to say that that's the highlight of these films, because obviously the highlights are the acting and, the stories. But when they get an extreme moment like that in there, it is pretty impressive. Because I think it really showcases that these ideas. I don't know, like I don't know. I sort of get a joy out of it. These extreme moments in the horror films, because they showcase that horror, you know, has always been around, and that there's always been sort of a perverse enjoyment for extreme horror, and these horror films were done so well, and they really. Oh, the poor dog, Wolfram. That's how you know that this guy is really hardcore evil. As soon as you saw Imhotep sort of stroking that sinister looking white cat, that poor Wolfram was in danger. Oh.
Helen, where have you been?
Karloff would go to
You've hunted everywhere.
England after this to do a film, The Ghoul. He actually went to England, they shot it there, and it's about Egypt and Egyptology. It was another one where he wore an extreme makeup, and he didn't really talk all that much in it. But I'm surprised that they didn't make an actual sequel to this. They obviously did the Tom Tyler Mummy's Hand movie, which is more of a B, like swashbuckler, I guess. It's obviously it's very different in tone from this film, but I think they could have done something with this film, just the idea of reincarnation and living again. They could have conceivably have brought back this character a lot easier than they could, Dracula or the Mummy.
We know that you were with Arthur today. Helen, I love you. I'm trying to help you, protect you. All are.
This little scene, like, I'd love to just watch David Manner's dialogue and just overlap it with Dracula, because I bet Balderston subconsciously wrote these same lines. I love you and I want to protect you. Oh, everything's going to be all right.
I'll never leave you alone.
I'll never leave you.
I'll get Mrs. Miller down here with you.
Gosh, he actually doesn't do a whole lot of use in any of the films he's in, David Manners. Maybe the most in The Black Cat. It's all better people who actually save the day. Edward Van Sloane, really. All he can do is sort of go to the bedside of his little girlfriend and comfort them.
Help me to get dressed and get out of here. Come over you again, Miss Grosvenor. I must escape. I'm being held here. You must help me.
See, like I was talking about Dracula and how much I love Zita Johann in this film. She actually, you compare it with Helen Chandler, who was, I don't know, she's just really serviceable, really. But she has a moment in Dracula like that, where, obviously she's also under the spell of Dracula. And, she goes into this trying to convince people to do her bidding and get her out of there so she can get to her master. But she actually, she's very convincing in that, like, that sort of, really showcases the strength of Imhotep's pull on her. She's sort of frantic and depressed, and, she tries her different things, and she wants to, she tries, being frantic and, saying, oh, I'll have someone to bribe, and now she's, appealing to the vanity, just like Helen Chandler's Mina did.
In short, I failed to make a diagnosis.
And, even this film, it's a little more risque in that, Helen Chandler wasn't allowed to wear a very revealing dress in here. She's more exotic, and this seduction element a little stronger.
You're going to get well. Then I know
You're going to get well, huh? Oh gosh, it's the same line.
I do love you, Frank. And I'm trying to prove it. Because I'd rather die than live and lose you.
you're going to live.
But you're going to live. You're going to get well. We're not going to lose each other.
My dear,
You told me. Just feminine vanity. I wanted to look my best again.
So you know more than I realized you.
what do you mean?
These impulses to go to Who is too strong to withstand their will?
I'm so
Yeah. Oh, here's a moment where actually they,
She knows the moment she stops struggling, he will give her back her strength to come to him.
it's actually a moment, that's a little stronger here.
someone I hate.
Be someone else, someone I hate. Yeah, it's a little stronger than Dracula in that, she actually does, take part in the bringing down of Imhotep. I don't want to be someone I hate, but, she,
Arthur has beaten me. Next time he draws her to him, he must
I don't know, you might say that, it's just a sort of, the same sort of deal, but I think this is actually a little stronger in that, Helen realizes that she's the one who actually has to, fight the mummy. She's the one that goes to the mummy. There we got the nurses again. It's just like Dracula.
I'll go to bed.
All right, I'll wait here till Dr. Miller comes.
Good night.
Good night.
Dr. Muller. What kind of doctor is Dr. Muller? That's another underdeveloped thing. You read that he's an Egypt mythologist now. They sort of present him as a sort of medical doctor. Yeah. He puts the little thing of Isis, which is sort of a cheap substitute for garlic and holy water on the door there. Karloff is great in these two sequences. I know I didn't really go full into it when he killed Wemple, but that was really effective. Arthur Byron, who played Wemple, did a really great job there too. Sort of going into the convulsions and suffering that heart attack. But look at how intense Karloff is. You see that he's sort of stretching his body a little bit there. And then I love when he releases, he sort of falls back with getting, putting, I don't know, it's hard to explain what he's doing there. But, there's the final one, the final yellow-eyed sequence. Just so much concentration on Karloff's part, and, I don't know what you'd call it, Here's
Where are we?
going back to
But this is not the temple.
going back to Unxanum, and taken the she's taken the
I never nearly decided my bed available.
back her she's become her old self, you would say. As I knelt by your bed 3,700 years ago, no man has ever suffered for a woman as you have suffered for me.
No, not yet. Your soul is an immortal.
See, Karloff was very adamant that he always wanted at least one sympathetic character trait so that he could use to really get into the character. He used it for himself to develop his character, because he felt if they had a sympathetic trait, no matter what the evil he could do, he would still be able to relate to it. And I suppose this is the trait about Imhotep, the fact that he suffered for this. He suffered for Anxanaman, but I don't know. It's somewhat troublesome in a way. Like, I don't think it's. I don't agree. Like, if that's what Karloff thought, I don't necessarily agree with it. It just it's just a thing about men fighting over women, which some people might argue that that's what all these films are about. But I think this one I think is like Dracula in the sense where he's another malevolent monster. And I think, the character's a little stronger if you play into the obvious insanity of what such an ordeal would do, I don't know. I see Karloff's point, but I think just, play up the black magic aspect of the character, the evil of the character, the idea that this is dark, and then later on we'll see it's to a light. What great use of lighting here. It reminds me somewhat of what was done in the last film we did, Murders in the Rue Morgue, those sequences at the carnival with all those shadows. And on the streets of Paris, as we're seeing those thugs, and there's a great little thing with Noble Johnson there, when he's turning that cauldron and like the light going into his eye. That's really incredible. And that's an improvement over Dracula. And that once that film leaves Transylvania, it doesn't. The lighting isn't quite as impressive.
Must be performed over thy body. Then I will read the great spell with which Isis brought Osiris back from the grave. Thou shalt rise again.
No. No, I'm alive. I'm young. I won't die.
So you're going back off of there.
But now you belong with the dead.
I loved you once, but now you belong with the dead. I'm a Nuxanawan, but I'm somebody else too.
Somebody else too. I want to live, even in this strange new world.
For thy sake I was buried alive. I ask of thee
Only a moment of agony.
only so can we be united.
You see on her face there that she's sort of going in and out of the character. She also has
Be done.
eyes that really are incredible. You sort of see going back, and to to the credit here, to her credit here, you don't know if she's playing at what point in it she's actually Helen or an Anxanamen, or Helen playing to be an Anxanamen.
Save me from that mummy! It's dead! Save me!
He also has a ring, just like Dracula. I wonder if the moments of well, Dracula actually didn't use his ring in the original one, but he sort of did it in House of Frankenstein. I wonder if that's sort of borrowed from here. Forrest Ackerman actually, I think, owned that ring later in his life, and part of all the collections that he had. Yeah, just like Dracula, these two stumble upon Helen, but stumble upon the heroine right in the moment of danger.
Going to. They must be under the museum. How
Yeah, the monsters. The monster in both of the films, Dracula and the Mummy, they don't have a very good layer. It's Carfax Abbey right away, and the museum where all this is going to happen.
received the underworld, the spirit of Anxanamen, but not for long. Osiris will release thy soul.
Yeah, look at that lighting there. You see, it's one of the few moments where they sort of effectively capture the flames flickering in black and white. And Karloff just had incredible makeup. It really really is effective and really kind of spooky. This sequence, getting the priorities right. Some of the other stuff is a little more extreme, but just her in that costume, she really, I guess you could say, was a trooper, and then she did have to put on with a costume that I don't think a lot of the other actresses would at this point of time. You see her belly there. I have to imagine, like all these films had trouble with the censors, but that might have been what concerned them all the most. And you see, like, it actually, that little dagger there touched the skin, touch her gut there. They come in at exactly the right time. All right, I've sort of been hinting at this one, but this I think is really extremely effective, where she actually saves herself, and then there's good to the evil in this world. That's really effective. Or I don't know if you'd say Helen saves herself, but I think she does. I'd like to think that happened, that she does, realize that she does realize that, that even her old self is an identity, and it's not just Imhotep, and she goes to the good of her old identity, and even her old identity frees herself from Imhotep. It's really Anxanamen that is the one who saves the day here, or saves Helen. There's a little aspect of John P. Fulton. Her love for you may bridge the centuries. Yeah, it would have been more effective had they actually had that flashback. Yeah, that's Helen's, or Zita Johann's greatest acting achievement, that she is so in love, that she portrays a great love for David Manners. Imhotep, Boris Karloff. This was actually the first film where Boris Karloff was credited as Karloff of the Uncanny, just sort of going into the legend. And Henry Victor was the one who played that Saxon warrior. He was a pretty popular character actor, and this, I think, was one of his first films. It's a shame that footage doesn't exist. There's so many lost footage from these Universal films that is just gone, and it would just give you a little extra look into those classic films. They'll probably never find it. It is a shame. I think The Mummy has some problems, and I know I talked a lot about it being similar to Dracula, but I think there's enough moments where it becomes its own film, and moments where it does things better than Dracula. I really think Zita Johann's incredible in the film, and I think there's moments that are among the most extreme. And obviously, I've come to appreciate Karloff a little more. A Lugosi guy isn't just a Lugosi guy. You can't be just a Lugosi fan. You really have to appreciate Karloff and his impact on motion pictures. And, I think, like Karl Freund and even Karloff, I think, thought this too, that this movie has a great deal of imagination. And it's a movie I'm glad that I've sort of reassessed. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope it was a good commentary. Until then, we will see you.